I'm here today with Ben Duranske, who's the CEO and co-founder of Beam Solutions, a company that sits at the intersection of fintech and SaaS. So today we're going to learn a little bit more about Ben, Beam, and fintech as a whole. So Ben, I'd love to kick it off and hear a little bit more about your background before starting Beam.
Yeah, compliance is really in Beam's DNA, both at the level of the founders, where myself and Andreas Bayer, our head of technology, and my co-founder in Beam, come from a technology background here in the Bay Area. You might not know this, but in 2010 I joined Facebook, and Facebook, unless you played a lot of Candy Crush Saga, is probably obscure as a money transmitter. But it is actually a money transmitter. It has the same licensing package that PayPal or that Western Union do. And that means that when we were there, when I was at Facebook and building out the team in the compliance department, we had to do all the things that a traditional financial institution does. Mm-hmm. We had to file suspicious activity reports. We had to follow Know Your Customer guidelines. We had to monitor every single one of our transactions. And that's an obligation on all financial services companies, literally from Facebook to Bank of America, mm-hmm. and including broker-dealers, casinos, and a lot of other institutions that you wouldn't necessarily think are financial institutions. Mm-hmm. From a regulatory perspective, they are. At the same time, Beam co-founder Andreas was at Zoom, of course acquired by PayPal, and he was in charge of building out all the internal tooling around that. Mm-hmm. We took a look at this industry, and we both felt like there was just a real gap, that there was something missing to serve the fintech needs, and then the software that was out there that was serving larger financial institutions really wasn't well suited for the future of technology in today's sort of fintech world. So that's where Beam was born.
So you left off being an author, but we'll save that for another day. What was it specifically about those experiences, both yours and Andreas's, that led you to start Beam?
Yeah, in both of our cases, I think we had to sort of run a buy versus build comparison. We had to decide if we were going to have our teams build out software inside the company or if we were going to buy something from an existing vendor. And we both reached the same conclusion, which was that there really wasn't anything on the market that was well suited to the fintech world. And what was on the market was older and a little bit more bank-oriented. At the time we looked at this, existing packages would only run on Windows. They were on-premises installation, and the companies simply weren't very nimble. In addition, they sort of monitor transactions, which is what Beam does. We look for bad things in the financial system, like terrorist financing and human trafficking and money laundering and drug crimes. And we help banks and other financial institutions find these. And the way that the software in the market did that was by running large rule sets against every single transaction. And so, for instance, we might say, if Michael deposited $800 in cash today, then we're going to queue that up for an individual human being, a person, who's a compliance analyst, to look at in context. We didn't do that, and we think that there's a better way to approach that. So the way that we look at this transaction world is a little different. We look at it holistically. So we'll take your pattern of activity around that transaction and decide in the same way that a human being would, using other data inputs and the surrounding activity, whether that's something that should actually be reported as suspicious. So there's still human beings in the loop, but at a certain level, it's not important to have human eyes on a transaction. If in this example, we knew that you just got back from Las Vegas because we saw that you bought a cup of Starbucks at Aria, we would deprioritize that transaction. And in so doing, we make it less likely that a human being has to look at that. At a bank that's got thousands of people employed doing this, it's really meaningful to be able to redeploy those key resources in a more impactful way rather than having them look at false positives all day long.
And so you talk about the human beings at banks that are chasing out these fraud alerts, and it's my understanding that that's where a lot of the waste in this industry goes today. Can you talk a little bit specifically about what they're doing? I get a fraud alert in my current legacy software. What does that individual have to do to chase that out?
Yeah, so fraud comes into play if it's at scale in this case, because if a successful fraud ring actually manages to extract a bunch of money from the system, that's money laundering. But it really goes beyond fraud, and we're looking for things that a fraud analyst wouldn't necessarily look at. But what happens with that alert when it comes into the system is that a human being takes control of it and will spend anywhere from 30 seconds for a low-value alert up to a half a day investigating something that looks like it's more impressive or important to the bank or the fintech that's looking into the problem. Then at the end of the day, that person actually fills out what's called a suspicious activity report. And at many institutions, particularly fintechs, the process of doing that involves copying and pasting information from one place to another, and then manually uploading this form to one of the government websites that regulates that industry. It's a painstaking process. So you're right that one of the ways that we add value for our partners, both at the bank level and for fintechs, is by reducing the false positives and allowing them to use those resources in a better way. But another way that we help them out is actually through just compliance orchestration. It's making this process easier. A financial analyst, like you described, will sit there with two screens, one full of cases and one with a Chrome browser open with 25 tabs in it, looking up things like your home value on Zillow, what the street traffic looks like on Google outside your business. So we look at those kinds of data points and incorporate that into our detection mechanism, but we also put that data in front of the analyst. So we found that both the false positive reduction has a benefit, and just the fact that the investigation is easier has a benefit. From an IT perspective, there's a real benefit to the org too, and that's that we're enterprise SaaS. We're running on AWS. We're an API-based system. So it's easy to integrate with us, and you can sort of, I guess as a fintech, especially one of the smaller ones that's kind of getting going, find a turnkey solution in Beam.
Mm-hmm. So in addition to the detection engine, you're actually working on the workflow software itself for the analysts as well.
That's right, and it depends on who we're talking to. The larger financial institutions are most interested in the fact that we're reducing false positives, and that's because they've got a huge room full of people that are doing this, anywhere from hundreds to, at larger banks, even thousands of analysts that are looking into these on a daily basis. Smaller institutions are most excited about the fact that we have plug-and-play software. The integration is easy, it's API-based, they can start sending us data very quickly, and they get results very quickly. So if they have an urgent compliance need, their bank is pressuring them, or a regulator is breathing down their neck, it's very easy to integrate Beam and solve that problem.
And so there's a lot been going on in fintech and just consumer payments in general. You know, fraud's been around for a very long time, and money laundering. What specifically about the market today has created an urgent need for this? I see things like, you know, channels multiplying online, obviously currencies as well. So what are some of the other market trends that are going on for Beam right now?
I think that one of the most important ones is that there are an emerging group of fintechs that at this point may not even realize that they're fintechs. And I would have put, 6 or 7 years ago when I was at Facebook into that category, where we were moving a lot of money around in the games business.
Yep.
And you referenced the book earlier, so I have to say it. My book is Virtual Law. It's out of print, so nobody needs to go look for it. But it's a book on legal issues arising from video games and virtual worlds. And it kind of led to what I'm doing now, because microtransactions had taken over at the point that I wrote that, and that was a part of the focus. That said, I guess if we were looking at what we were doing at Facebook, it seems like we're running a games business, we're running a social network. Those two things obviously don't involve sort of traditional financial services. But inside the games business, you're taking money from a game player and hanging on to it for a couple of weeks and then paying a developer. In the eyes of a lot of regulators, that's going to be considered money transmission. There are a lot of companies like that, especially in the platform economy that's emerged now, that I think are on the cusp of finding themselves either regulated or under a great deal of pressure from their bank to enact policies and procedures and bring software in to detect suspicious activity. Because some of these platforms, if you think about them, actually make pretty good vectors for money laundering.
Yeah, we have a saying at Canaan, which is all big brands will become fintechs, and we've seen it all across Asia, and today we're seeing it with Amazon lending, Shopify lending. You mentioned Facebook, so we think we're in the very early innings of that.
I think you're onto something.
What in addition to Beam, what other trends in fintech are you seeing today that you think are interesting?
I think one of the most interesting things that's happening in fintech is sort of outside of the Silicon Valley money-making bubble. Fintech is a potential force for enormous social change. And we've seen some really interesting things happen in that space over the last 3 years and even in the last 6 months as people have started to explore new ways to use blockchain and as people have tried to find new ways to even use traditional money movement. I think some of the most interesting things are simply making it cheaper for people to move their own money from place to place. I've seen estimates as high as $44 billion in fees that are spent moving one's own money from one place to another on an annual basis. It's an enormous number. And that money is coming out of the pockets of people who are frequently less advantaged and who are sending money home to family members who desperately need it. There's some really interesting movement in that space, and I think that those companies are doing something valuable. Another thing that we've started to see is people using blockchain, not necessarily for cryptocurrency or moving money around, but for the fact that it's an immutable public ledger. And of course, this ties into fintechs because there's usually money movement associated with it too. But one company that I've spent some time with over the last couple of years is working on a solution to help enable the downstream tracking of donations in sub-Saharan Africa. And so where there are vaccines being distributed, for instance, there's an enormous amount of loss in that system because of the geopolitical situation that the organizations who are doing good work there are facing. And by creating an immutable public ledger around this, you can actually track the donation dollar to the vaccine, to the company that's providing that, to the driver who brings it to the village, and to the doctor who administers the vaccine in the village, and provide a proof back to the donor that that's true. It's a fascinating way to use this, and I think that fintechs for good are one of the most interesting things that's happening in the space right now.
Perhaps an Act 2 for Beam.
Perhaps. In the short term, we're proud of the fact that we're actually stopping some bad things from happening. We've got some notes up on the wall that remind us that we're looking for human trafficking and drug trafficking and things that actually have a hugely negative impact on society. And we're proud of the fact that we're helping our partners with those.
Absolutely. So you left Facebook as a Chief Compliance Officer almost 2 years ago now, and I've been humbled to be your partner along the entrepreneurial journey. What advice do you have for any founders out there that are thinking about starting companies today?
I think that the phrase that founding a company is one of the loneliest jobs in the world is a true one, and I think that the advice that I'd offer is that it doesn't have to be. It's important to surround yourself with people, not just on your team, which you're going to do because you want to build your team, but also from the rest of the entrepreneurial community. And I'd even go a step further with that and say that it's really important to sort of create an almost 360-degree coaching circle for yourself, where you're getting advice from people who've walked this walk and stepped down this path before. One of the advisors to Beam is Rich Aberman, who's a great guy, founder of WePay, one of the co-founders of WePay. And I love getting together with him and talking about what might come next. But at the same time, I've learned a lot, even as a relatively young company, meeting with companies that are even a year or two younger than us, looking at somebody's first pitch deck when they're seeking a seed round and helping them find some different ways to express themselves to VCs, always gives me, I guess, both a good feeling and also I learn something from it every single time I do. So I recommend that founders not let this be a lonely job. It can be one of the most fun things you'll ever do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Ben, for joining us today, and thank you to the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. At Canaan, we believe we truly are in the very first inning of fintech and the change that it's going to bring. So come and see us as you're starting your businesses.